When you want to draw and paint on your canvas, you'll need the brush tool, and you'll choose from several categories, each of which has a number of specific variants that will make a particular kind of mark on your canvas. As you hover over these specific variants here, you'll see a stroke preview at the bottom of the panel and a dab preview next to it. But it's much more exciting and satisfying to simply make a stroke on your canvas and then see what happens. So that is Digital Airbrush 2. I'll change color and I'll choose another category. Let's choose Artist's Oils. And once again, we can look at the bottom to get an idea of what to expect, but let's just make a stroke and see what happens. This stroke is quite interesting. It fades out as you go. Let's choose a marker. I'll choose fine tip. Markers tend to get darker as they go, and this is no exception. I'll go now to a chalk. And where do I find chalk? Chalk, crayons, and Conti. They used to be separate categories, but now they are combined. Real fat chalk sounds good. Let's make that a magenta color, and notice that it does reveal the paper texture. Paper texture can be selected from your paper library. Here's basic paper, which is a nice fine grain, but you can also get something very dramatic. This is a pebbleboard texture. I'll go back to the basic paper. And let us now choose a blender. What does the diffuse blur look like? I'm going to go in there and just kind of scribble around, and that's what's happening. I'm getting a diffuse blur. I'll choose another blender. Smear 2 sounds promising, and yes, that's a very strong smeary blender. And moving right along, let's go to a pens and pencils, which again used to be separate categories, but they've been combined once again. I will choose the nervous pen, which looks like so. It gets more and more nervous as your speed reduces. If you want to make for some very quick strokes, then it's a little bit less jittery. And let's go to something a little bit more ordinary and have it be the thick and thin pen. I'll use a green this time, and so here's my thick and thin pen stroke, which I can see has response to pressure. Very thin stroke for light pressure, and it gets thicker and more opaque as you press down. Well, it won't be long before you find that there are certain pens, pencils, crayons, oils, acrylics that you would like to get back to without having to plow through all of these categories and variants to find them once again. There are a number of ways to find your favorites or to go back to a previous variant. One way is simply to look at your recent brushes. All the panels, by the way, are found under the window menu. So here's recent brushes, and for example, we can go to real fat chalk, and we can go to fine tip marker by finding it in this array of brushes. But this only takes you to the last 10 items that you have used. If you know the name of the brush you're looking for, you can simply type it into the search field. So let's say we know that there was something called thick and thin something. Let's see what happens when we press that. And sure enough, there is a thick and thin pen in pens and pencils. That's the category. And so if I tap that, it will bring me immediately to that variant, and I can begin to make that mark once again. The best way to have access to your favorite brush variants is to create a custom palette, and we'll get one started. So let's say thick and thin pen is something I want to have in a custom palette. All I need to do is hold my Shift key down and drag to the canvas. And there it is. That's the first item in a custom palette. I think I might also want to have a blender, and Smear 2 seemed to be a good one, but I'm not sure. I'd like to try Grainy Water 2, so let's see what that does. And I'm thinking not so much. Let's try Just Add Water, and oh, that's quite nice. So I'm going to take Just Add Water into my custom palette by holding the Shift key down and dragging it over. Now, in the next movie, I will show you how you can manage your custom palettes, add paper texture and library items to them, as well as commands. And in the meantime, please practice scribbling with Painter 2016. We have begun to create a custom palette, which currently just has two items, a thick and thin pen and a Just Add Water blender. Let's add a couple more items to this custom palette. I'd like to have my square hard pastel in there, so I chose it from recent brushes. And then with a shift drag, I'll bring it into my current custom palette. I'd like to have an alternative to basic paper available. And so when I choose the canvas paper, coarse cotton canvas, I can also drag that into my custom palette with my shift and a drag. And now I have a coarse cotton canvas paper texture, and it might as well sit next to my square hard pastel. There are a couple of categories we have not looked at. Well, there are several we haven't looked at. Some of them provide you with effects that are difficult, if not impossible, to create with traditional tools. We have a pen category for using pattern as the content of a stroke. Pattern pen masked will make this kind of a stroke if you have selected this lotus petals as your pattern. I'll choose another pattern. Hens and chicks is the default pattern, and notice that I am painting with pressure sensitivity across the canvas. Suppose I want to have the pattern pen masked as part of my custom palette. I think I'd better show the custom palette first, and now I can drag it in. And I can also drag in any specific patterns that I would like. Decorative ginkgo pen is quite nice, so I will add that item from the library into the custom palette. Once again, just a shift and drag, and it's showing up right next to pattern pen masked is a sensible place to put it. There is a way to paint with a gradient. A gradient pen doesn't have its own category. It's part of pens and pencils. If we go to grad pen, which stands for gradient, I can paint with the current gradient, which happens to be this lavender neon, it's called. I quite like that, so I'm going to shift and drag my grad pen variant into the custom palette, and also shift drag. And so I have dragged lavender neon into my custom palette. Now, it's already beginning to look as if there's quite a bit of real estate taken up by the custom palette, and there are a number of ways that you can minimize that. You can always simply double-click the title bar, and it will flip up, and you can open it up when you need it. Or you can make each of these icons smaller by simply doing a right-click or a control-click on the Mac, and then you can show a narrower icon view. I'll do the same with thick and thin pen. In some cases, you might want to have, as an alternative to an icon, simply a text view. So this is telling you what it is, a grad pen. And we still have square hard pastel here as the regular sized icon. There is a choice for making those symbols, those icons, into the category icon, and you need to go to your preferences for that. Let's go to Preferences, Interface, and see that we can use category instead of stroke as the icon in your custom palette. So with that change made, let's click OK. And now let's have a new item dragged into our custom palette. I'll choose an eraser. Let's say Real Hard Eraser is effective. And we will shift and drag that item into the custom palette. And now notice it is the icon for that category rather than a stroke preview. I have prepared a custom palette for you, which will enable you to do a good deal of scribbling with the new brush variants in Painter 2016. The way you organize your custom palettes is with the Custom Palette Organizer. This will enable you to rename any given palette. So I will do that here. I will just call that Demo Palette. and that's okay. Now that changed. I also want you to import an item from your working files folder. So let us do that. Go to the working files, which you may have on your desktop, and then for chapter 1, import Painter 2016 sampler.pal, where .pal stands for palette. I already have it open, so I'm not going to do that effect. It's here, and by simply clicking done, and so now I can simply enable you to see it on your desktop, and this will give you an opportunity to work with an acrylic variant, pepper spray once again. The Sargent brush is a lovely stroke that is quite creamy looking, and it's named after a famous painter of the early part of the 20th century. You have here an artist's oil, a blender, yet another blender, and a gloopy brush. I'll change color once again. There's a gloopy brush which has a thick paint look. We have a gradient, another gradient, a third gradient also. And I will invite you now to make a sampler of scribbles using all of the items that are in this Painter 2016 sampler custom palette. We looked at preferences to choose between two different ways of showing icons in the custom palette. There are several other very useful choices to be made in preferences. One has to do with the cursor type, that is, what do you see when your stylus hovers over the canvas? Enhanced Brush Ghost, which is shown here by default, looks like this. We have a circle with a stem that indicates how deeply or steeply the angle is that you're holding your stylus. If you hold your stylus vertical just over the tablet and make a stroke, in this case with the pepper spray airbrush, the particles will distribute themselves equally around your stroke. If, as would be the case in real life, if you tilt your stylus, then the spray is going to go into that direction. So as I tilt my stylus in the other direction, I am showing that the spray is responding, just as it would in traditional airbrush. I'm going to choose a pencil called Real 6B Soft Pencil, and I'll make a black color for that. If I hold my stylus perpendicular to the tablet, I just get a nice smooth pencil stroke. But if I tilt my stylus, I will be getting the side of the pencil touching the paper and producing this beautiful wide stroke. There are times when the enhanced ghost brush will slow you down if you're working with a complex brush. So I can suggest that you go back to Preferences and choose Brush Ghost. This is usually the one I like because it shows me the footprint of my variant. In Square Hard Pastel, for example, this is really showing you the size and the texture of that brush tip. There are other choices to be had, so let's take a look once again. And you can see that Preferences for interface will include just a single pixel, which might be great for accuracy, but it's a little hard to see in my opinion. You can choose a number of actual small icon images. But I'll go back to Brush Ghost and click OK. There is a particular brush variant that I have had as my favorite for several versions of Painter, and I was not able to find it in Painter 2016. It is a pen, and when I look in pens and pencils, I don't see what I was hoping to see, which is called dry ink, and everything here is alphabetical, so it ought to have been in here somewhere. I'm going to the search field now, and I've already typed dry ink, and let's see what it does for me. Dry ink is, well, dry camel, it's not even close. Dry ink in the Sumie category. Well, let's try that and see what it does. I'll make a color for that. And this isn't at all what I was expecting or wanting. So I'm going to now go to change my brush library. I am working with the Painter 2016 brushes, which is as to be expected. These are the newest brushes. But I also have access to other libraries. I know that the brush I'm looking for is in the 2015 library, so I will switch to that. And I will, in fact, go now to pens, which is its own category in that library. And dry ink is right where I wanted it to be. Here's my dry ink that I like so well. Well, let's see if I can put it into the 2016 library. And here's how that's done. I will go to the menu for the brush picker, and I will look for the export command. Export the brush rather than these other choices. The brush itself, dry ink dot brush variant. Let's put it on the desktop. So I will save it. I've done this before, so I will replace what I had before. Now I can reload my current latest brush library 2016, and I will import the item that I saved. So let's import that brush from the desktop where it is waiting, and so we have it. I'll keep the name. I'm accustomed to that name, and I have a choice of category. I can put it anywhere I wish. So I will put it into pens and pencils. I will save it. I could have even made up a new category there. And now let's just take a look and see if I have dry ink at the bottom of my pens and pencils category. And so I'm good to go. In this movie, we will look at a number of ways that you can determine the look and feel of your Painter workspace. We've looked at choosing the cursor type. There are choices here for the units of measurement. Pixels seems to be a good choice for most purposes. When you make a custom palette, you have a choice for the stroke preview as the icon or the category image. So in pens and pencils, this would be the category icon. As for the default view, by default, you can have all of your images available at any given time, or you can choose the single document view, which hides everything else from view. As for toolbox layout, I prefer having a vertical double column for my toolbox and a vertical single column for my media. Media includes patterns, gradients, nozzles, and weaves. I don't really care what the command bar looks like. So we can just look at the performance panel, which has a number of options that I don't feel a need to change at the moment. As for shapes and cloning, we will look at those when we are dealing with those features. So I'm ready to click OK, and now I see that my toolbox is, in fact, a double vertical column. I can drag my media up so I can see all of the items there. And here's where I'll show you that a single document view will just completely cover the screen. No other images that might be open will be accessible. So I'll just tap that once again, and now I see that my title bar is available, so I could access other images. Now, when it comes to how your palettes are arranged, and there are many such items in Painter, you're going to want to decide which things are important enough to take up space and which are not for any given purpose. Painter gives you a number of palette arrangements to choose from. By default, let's see what they have for you. That's what we saw before I made a couple of changes. Here's your default layout. Let's see the layout for people who are new to Painter. What you get is, in addition to the usual suspects over here, your color and your layers, you'll get hints, which are extremely useful for telling you and showing you what some of the features and special effects and brush controls are all about. So if you switch to a different category or variant, you might find that the hints update to show you exactly what is relevant to that choice. If I choose liquid ink, for example, I do get a series of hints explaining the function of liquid ink brushes. I might want to choose a layout that shows me the new brushes, the brushes that are new for this version of Painter, and here they are. I do get hints, the same hints that I had just before, But I also have the panels for audio settings. That's new. Dynamic speckles are new, and there is a special kind of blending that is new. If I want to go to a layout that is appropriate for illustration or photo art, I have those available. If I want to eliminate a lot of choices, I can choose the simple layout, and this gives me, rather than that full property bar, here I have a command bar, which allows me simply to create a new document or save it, undo and redo, cut, copy, and paste, and so on. And here I have, again, a trimmed down toolbox. Here we have brush category is separate from the brush variant. The brush tool, the eyedropper, which will allow you to pick up color from a document, the paint bucket, the eraser, a couple of selection tools, and so on. So this is a simple layout. Now you can create your own custom layout. I'm going back to the default, and once again, I'm going to have to go to my preferences interface to choose the vertical double column for my toolbox layout. I'm happy with brush ghost. I'm happy with pixels. And I think I'm going to switch to category for my custom palette icon. And now when I click OK, I see that this is arranged for me. I'm going to eliminate Navigator. I hardly ever use that. And I'm also going to change my color display by eliminating the color info. That's the RGB that you see in those sliders there. Now I can actually move that color picker to a smaller space. Layers I like, and that's really all I need for the moment. So I will save that arrangement. I've actually already saved that arrangement as Rhoda Basic. And as long as I'm here, I'll show you that you can have two favorite layouts and you can easily toggle between them. So we have seen a number of ways that you can organize your workspace in Painter, and we will plunge into some actual painting in upcoming movies.
Greetings and welcome to your O'Reilly training course. This movie is going to help you find and easily access your working files for your O'Reilly course. The working files are designed to allow you to work alongside the author as they're teaching the course material, and in most cases, the author will announce whenever they have provided a working file. Please note that the courses seen in this video may not be the same as the course you are currently learning. This video is meant only to demonstrate how to get your working files. If you are a subscriber to our learning library, you will see a Download Working Files button once you get into the details of the course. To download the working files, simply left-click on the Download Working Files button and your browser will automatically download the working files as a zip file. Once the working files have finished downloading, you can simply extract the downloaded zip file and place them directly onto your desktop. It's as easy as that. If you have downloaded this course from our website, then you will have gone to a download page that looks like this. And you may see that the working files are a separate download file. Once you have downloaded the working files, you can extract the downloaded zip files and place them directly onto your desktop. From the player, you will see a menu bar located up here with various buttons just above the video. From the player menu bar, look for this button. When you move your mouse over it, a label will show up that reads Open Working Files. Left-click on this icon and a window will open up to show you where the files are located. You may see multiple files as the working files are organized within them. To make things easier for yourself, we suggest copying all of these working files to the desktop of your computer. Please note that if you downloaded the working files separately, as we mentioned earlier, you will not see them here. However, you should already know where they are, as you should have extracted them and placed them somewhere on your computer, well, like the desktop. If you are watching this from the DVD, there are a couple of ways to access the working files directory so you can open up your files. Now, you will only be able to open these files from the DVD. If you make some changes and would like to save them, you will need to save them onto your computer. Copy the working files to the desktop, as we have shown earlier from the player. This way you can find them quickly and easily because they are located on your desktop, and you can open and save any changes as you work along with the lessons. You can also find the working files by going directly into the Files folder. To get to this folder from your DVD on your PC, go into your computer, find your DVD drive with the disk in it, and select it. You will see that there will be a Working Files folder on the disk that you can drag and drop to your desktop. You can also copy this to your desktop by right-clicking on the folder and selecting Copy, then right-clicking on your desktop and selecting Paste. If you are on a Mac, click on the DVD icon for the disk on your desktop. A window will open and show you all the files on the disk. You can then drag and drop the working files to your desktop. You can also copy this to your desktop by right-clicking on the folder and selecting Copy, then right-clicking on your desktop and selecting Paste.
We'll begin working with layers, and first I'd like you to open a custom palette with the Custom Palette Organizer. I have Basic Drawing already open, but you can find it by using the Import command and then navigating to your Working Files folder. So with that accomplished, let's double-click the title bar, and you'll see that there are 3 items in the Pen and Pencils category. And of course, the icons are identical, but you can change one or more of those if you wish. I will change Real Drippy Pen from the icon to a text view by simply doing a right-click or a control-click on the Mac. Then I can choose Text View. I can do the same with one of my chalk, pastel, and crayon icons. So Real Soft Conti, for example, can be changed to a text view as well. And now I think I'm ready to make a quick sketch with Real Drippy Pen on my canvas. And it's going to be a bottle of wine, there's a label, and a wine glass. There we go, and we can see that there is some wine in the glass. Now I'd like to put some color on this drawing, so I will choose a new layer from the new layer icon. There it is. And now if I switch to a nice rosé color and choose my oil pastel, I will begin making a pinkish wine. Notice that the lines are being covered because in default mode, or composite method I should call it, everything is opaque. I could reduce the opacity of that layer, or I could change the composite method, and I'll do that. I'll choose gel, which is the same as multiply in Photoshop. So gel. Now the color layer is transparent and the lines can show through. I'll take my eraser and just clean that up a little bit. So that's one way you can create a layer, just by choosing a layer on the Layers panel, a new layer. I will delete that layer and show you another way to create a layer. By using my selection tool, I'm going to drag a selection around the glass and then use a cut and paste command. So that was cut. Now I will paste. Notice I have a couple of paste choices. Paste in place is what I want now. But now this item is its own layer, just the wine glass. I'm just going to erase that one little bit that got included by accident. Once again, I can use my layer adjuster tool to move that around, and notice that there is some white showing, so I'm going to return to gel mode. Now they are transparent to each other, and so I can see the glass through the bottle. Let's look at another way to create layers, and I will simply delete that layer, and I'll also do a select all and a delete on the canvas. There is a collection of image bits in your Painter menu. It will be images under Media Library panels. Let's open that up, and we can see that there is an image portfolio with a number of items that you can simply double-click on. I'll double-click on the wheel, and that immediately finds its way onto the canvas and shows up as a layer with the appropriate name. Let's reduce the size of that by going to the Transform command that shares a space with the Layer Adjuster tool. You can distort or maintain the proportions by holding the Shift key down. You can also rotate if you want to rotate your tires, there you go, or use any of these other transform commands. When you're happy with your transformation, you can commit or you can cancel. I'll commit. I'm also going to put the piano keys up here. So I've double-clicked on piano keys. There they are. And notice that now piano is on top of wheel, as you can see. If I wanted wheel to be on top of piano, I'll just drag it in the list, and now I can see that it is showing up on top of piano keys. I will add pumpkin to the mix and move it on over the piano keys, and I'll enlarge it also. Let's go to the transform command and enlarge it with the shift key down so that I have not distorted it, and I will commit to that. Now let's experiment with some composite methods. You've seen gel. That always results in something darker because you're combining pixels. Let's see what Magic Combine will do for us. Well, that's kind of interesting. We can see that the pumpkin shows up only through the black keys and not through the white keys. Let's try screen. This lightens things up quite a bit, but we can still see something through the white keys. And we'll try soft light, yet another kind of look. Hard light, very bold. Let's take a look at darken, which will always allow the darker pixel to win between the two layers. Lighten, of course, will allow the lighter pixel to win. Now, if I should decide that I'm happy with a particular combination, I could group these things. Let's bring piano up next to pumpkin so that now if I select them both, I can make a group out of them. And now notice that I can move them or alter them, transform them as a group. I can still, however, spin that little triangle down, and so I can move or alter pumpkin all by itself. There is a way to remove part of a layer temporarily by using a layer mask, and I'll show you that on the wheel. So with the layer mask icon chosen, I will use the scratchboard tool, and I will choose black. And if I simply go into the center of that wheel, I'm not painting black. What I'm doing with black on the layer mask is making pixels invisible. And I can prove that to you by simply dragging well, first I will have to move the wheel up above these other layers so I can show you what's going on with that. And now when I move the wheel, you can see, indeed, I have made a hole in the wheel. But if I simply go back to my layer mask and notice there's a black spot there, which indicates the part of that layer that is invisible. White on a layer mask means visible, black, invisible. A shade of gray would produce partial visibility. So I'll switch to white and go back to my scratchboard tool, and on the layer mask, I will simply scribble back the pixels that were made invisible before. In this movie, we'll continue working with layers. There are 3 categories in Painter that require their own special layers. One of them is liquid ink, and you can see by the stroke preview at the bottom of the brush picker what some of these very exciting effects are like. Another is watercolor, down at the bottom of the alphabetical list, and these are some of the preview strokes for watercolor, which imitate traditional watercolor very nicely. Real watercolor is the most recent addition to the watercolor collection in Painter, and it has some very sophisticated brush variants. There's actually a 3rd watercolor category, which historically was the original one, and this does not require a special layer, but these variants will work just fine on the canvas. Well, let's open a special layers custom palette. You'll find it in the custom palette organizer using the import command to find it in working files folder. Let's take a look at some of the watercolor variants. I'll start with runny, wet, flat, and I will make a stroke going across the canvas. It certainly is runny, and we can see by the brush ghost that it is flat. So if you drag down, it's going to be a thinner stroke. If you drag across, it will be a thicker stroke. And look at how those strokes interact with each other. If I change color, I'll get some very interesting interactions as well. where they are dissolving and evolving into the paper. Incidentally, I am using a thicker paper that I added to my custom palette. It's rough watercolor paper. And if we switch to grainy wash bristle, I believe I can show you the effect of that paper. I'm just going to drag a few more strokes here and show you by switching back to basic paper, which is a much finer texture, that you can get a lot of interesting variations simply based on your choice of paper. Let's see what Soft Camel does in the watercolor category, and I'll change to another color again. This is a very soft, more subtle brush effect, and you can go over strokes and get darker and denser, which is the way traditional watercolor operates. I'm going to switch to the real watercolor category, and there's no reason why I can't continue working on this watercolor layer, and I will, but I can also create another watercolor layer. This is Real Wet Filbert, and let's make a new color happening here. So Real Wet Filbert is now going to apply and lighten as it goes onto that watercolor layer. If I do want a new watercolor layer, I'll just hold the new layer icon down and choose New Watercolor Layer. Now, when I have that, I can use either of the watercolor categories. I'll go to Fractal Wash Wet, and with yet another color, let's see what happens when I drag some strokes over there. I'm going to hide that first watercolor layer just so we can see more clearly what this particular variant can do. It lightens up as we go. There's a little bit of a buildup, but it has a wonderfully ragged, irregular edge to it, which is a great way to imitate the accidental kinds of effects that you get with traditional watercolor brushes. Finally, splatter dry, and I'll go to a blue and show you that you can get some wonderful spattery effects here. And incidentally, if you wanted to change the size of this brush or any brush, you can do so in the size slider in your property bar, or simply by holding down the modifier keys on your keyboard. That would be Command Option on the Mac and Control Alt on your PC. So here we have somewhat larger spattery effects. Let's open up the other watercolor layer and see how these two are going to interact with each other. You also have, by default, gel method to make these layers transparent to each other, but I could change that. I could change to colorize, to screen, darken, which is similar to gel, I believe. There we go. Now gel is even darker. In any case, you do have access to the full variety of composite methods. Now let's hide those layers for now so you can look at some liquid ink effects. Here's a coarse airbrush stroke in liquid ink, and notice that the liquid ink layer has been made automatically. Let's take Smooth Bristle Resist. It doesn't matter what color I use for Resist, because Resist is the kind of brush that eliminates or removes paint. You can also work with Resist on a blank part of the canvas, and notice those circular motions I made. If I now go back to Coarse Airbrush and paint over that area, notice that the resist effect has prevented these green paint pixels from being deposited. So we have a lot of choices that are unusual in the liquid ink department. I'm going to enable advanced brush controls, and notice that liquid ink is showing. The purpose of advanced brush controls is so that whatever variant or category you choose, you will have instant access to the particular controls that are appropriate for that brush. We also have, by simply hovering, we have some wonderful tool tips, which include visual tips so that you can understand very clearly what each of these sliders can accomplish. So let's look at ink type. Let's look at ink plus color, which is what this was by default. If I switch to ink only, then what happens? Then it's just going to be black. If I switch to color only and go to an orange color, now I can color the ink stroke that I made before, I can also color parts of the other strokes that I made before. What happens when I use soften ink plus color? Well, you can see what that does. Soften ink only. So the color is not being affected, but the ink is. Soften color only. Now we're going to go in there and blend some of these colors with each other without affecting the ink stroke itself. So once again, a very exciting category that I think is underutilized in Painter. I invite you to experiment with liquid ink as well as the other categories of brushes. In this project, we will create a colorful sketch using a photo of a kid shoe, which you can find in your Working Files folder. We will also want to use the basic drawing custom palette, so you can open that with your custom palette organizer and the import command. It will also be useful to have the shoe as a reference image. So I'm going to open the reference image panel and using the open reference image icon, find the kid shoe once again, and this will be handy in a moment, as you'll see. First thing to do is make the image into a layer. So using my keyboard shortcuts, I'll use Command or Control A to select all, then Command or Control X to cut that, and Command or Control V to paste it back into the image as a layer. Now, the reason for that is we want to be able to reduce the opacity of it so that we can use it as a guide for tracing. And I will now make a new layer for that purpose, and I'll call it Sketch. This will be a line drawing. Let's experiment with some of the basic drawing variants that we already have. Real 2B pencil is going to be a little too thick and have too much variation in it. Let's try Scratchboard tool. Also, too much responsiveness to pressure. Let's take a look at some other items in the pens and pencils category and see what looks good. Crow quill pen, let's try that. Again, a little bit too much responsiveness to pressure, although better than what we had before. Well, I'm inclined to see a gravity lazy sketch as what we need. And so that is what I'm going to use. And I will put that into my basic drawing custom palette by holding the shift key down and just dragging that icon over. And I know by its position that that's gravity lazy sketch. So I will now undo all of those test strokes and begin to work on making a very loose, very kind of sloppy line drawing of the shoe. You may want to work a little bit more accurately, but this is the style I generally use even when I'm working with traditional sketching tools. Sometimes I can do all or most of a drawing without lifting my hand off the paper, but I don't expect you to want to do that or have to do that. Let's just put a little bit of a darker line underneath. And let's see what it looks like without the photo visible. So there we have our sketch. I think it's pretty good. And I'll make a new layer for color. So I'll call that color just by typing into that space there, the name field. And I will make it a gel mode or composite method so that the color will be transparent and allow the lines to show through. Now, this is where our reference image will come in handy. I will use the dropper tool to pick up on a color, that blue, for example, and I might make my photo visible again so that I can see where to place the stripes. But I don't want to use the lazy sketch pen. I want to switch to the oil pastel, and now I can do that with my oil pastel. I can go to a different blue. Let's make that happen over there. The green is up here. And there's also a light blue down here. It's not necessary, actually, to make this accurate. You can use whatever colors you wish. It's interesting. I don't care for that yellow. Let's make that a little different. It's interesting to follow the contour of the folds in the shoe in order to make that somewhat more realistic. The colors are darker underneath here, but again, we don't have to be accurate. And so I will perhaps put some of those colors in there. Red, we seem to have forgotten up to this point. Let's put a lot of red in there. The red is going to cover our shoelaces, and we're going to put some red over here. If you want to make a thinner stroke, you don't have to go all the way to your brush picker. You can simply use your Command and Option or your Control and Alt keys in order to change the thickness of your stroke. We can get some of this purple in there as well and go like this. Let's use this putty color and with real soft Conti go in there and make for some of that color up in here as well. Let's turn off the visibility of the photo at this point and see what we have. Well, we need to put a few stripes in this space here, so I will go back to red and go back to my oil pastel and put in some of that light blue over here and more of that red up here. I quite like the lavender, so I'll put more of those strokes in there. I can satisfy myself. As to color, I think at this point it might be good to do a bit of smearing. So I'll use the Just Add Water variant and go in there and make for some blending and smearing. It looks like I could use a larger blender, so I'm just going to make it larger by changing the size on the fly. And here we go. I'm going to make some of these stripes kind of blend with each other, get to know each other. And so we're going to eliminate some of those edges on the stripes. I think I'd like to put this bold black or dark blue. Let's see what it is. It is a dark blue. And using my oil pastel, put that in there. And I think we are just about ready to call it. There might be some dark area in here to put in and back here. I'm going to use my Gravity Lazy Sketch once again to scribble some characters in here just to kind of imitate whatever the symbol is, and likewise do a bit of scribbling down here for the texture on the bottom of the shoe and maybe blend. No, that's too much of a blend. Let's go back to a smaller size for that and undo that last blend. And so now I think I can get more effective blending for that. A little trimming with the eraser, maybe just around there and over here, and maybe just a little bit of a darker tone. Whoop, that's not what I wanted to do because I'm still using the hard eraser. I want to switch to my oil pastel and get that dark area, and now I can be a little bit more satisfied with what I have. Slightly more blending over here, and there we have it. It is a kid's shoe, and I invite you to give this a try, and I'll see you in the next movie. Let's take a tour of Painter's Toolbox. The brush tool is what you'll need to make marks of any kind on the canvas. So let's make a few of those with various colors and an assortment of brushes. Oh, that's quite lovely. Real bristle drip. I'll switch to orange and show you a grainy dry brush. Let's use the leaky marker with purple. Okay. Now, whenever you choose a tool in the toolbox, the corresponding collection of variables or controls that are appropriate will appear in the property bar. That's this horizontal strip at the top of the screen. So for a brush tool, you have a choice between freehand strokes, straight line strokes. You can change the size of the brush, the opacity of the brush, and depending on the variant, there will be a few other options as well to change the behavior of the brush. If you choose the dropper tool, there really aren't any controls except to reset the tool. And the dropper tool's function is to simply sample a color that already exists on your canvas. Rather than go all the way to the toolbox to sample the dropper, if you just paint and hold your Option or Alt key down, you can quickly convert to the dropper and then continue painting without any interruption in the flow. The paint bucket, as you may expect, is something that will be used to fill a space. And you have a choice in the property bar when the paint bucket is chosen to fill with either the current color. So let's change the current color and do a fill there. You can also choose a gradient, and here's where you get to determine which gradient you like. So let's choose the aquatic neon, and I will fill that space with that gradient. You can also fill with a source image. We don't have a source image designated, so Painter just defaults to the current pattern, and that would be the hens and chickens. So I'll simply fill the entire background with hens and chickens. I'll undo that. It's pretty annoying to look at that. Now, one other possibility would be weaves, and you do have a selection of weaves also in your media collection, and there we have a weave fill. There is an eraser in the toolbox, which behaves as you would expect. There's also an eraser category in the brush picker, and here is where you will choose a specific kind of eraser that has the characteristics that you like. But sometimes just going to the toolbox is fine. Now, moving down to layer adjuster, we'll need a layer in order to look at that. And so I'll create a new layer, and with this tool, I'll just make a stroke and show you with the layer adjuster that this is in fact on its own layer, and so it can be moved, it can be transformed. Notice now that the property bar has layer adjuster and transform commands available. Let us go then to a selection tool, and if I make a selection, I'll just make the layer disappear, and I'll go into the canvas to make a selection. Now, that selection can be filled with whatever you choose on the property bar for that purpose. The selection can also be altered using the selection adjuster tool, which is another place on the toolbox. The selection adjuster is not affecting the contents, it is simply affecting the shape and size of the selection area. I'll just use the command D or deselect command to select none. So we now don't have any more selections active on the canvas. Looking at the selection tool once again, let's notice that there is a rectangular or an oval selection capability. And once you have any of the selection tools chosen, you do have some choices in the property bar for picking either the lasso, which is a freehand selection area, or the oval selection. So if I choose the oval selection and make a selection in that shape, it has made the previous selection disappear. Now, if I want to add to a selection, I can use the Add to Selection icon in the property bar. And now if I choose the square format, and I can find that up here as well. Now, by adding to the selection, I have just created that new shape. I can also subtract from a selection, and let's make a hole in that selection. And sure enough, I can show you that that is in fact a hole by using the paint bucket once again, and let's fill with the current color. So there it is, and I can move that around by dragging it. You can also, with your keyboard shortcut, you can use the Shift key to add to a selection. Notice that I have the Shift key down and the icon has changed to a plus, or I could have my Option or Alt key down and now the icon has changed to a minus sign, so that means it will subtract from the current selection. I am going to show you on another image. Let's access the red pavilion image, and I'll show you the power of the magic wand selection tool. And now when we look at the property bar, notice there is a tolerance amount. And let me simply show you that the magic wand picks up pixels based on their color. So with the 32 tolerance, that is by default, I can increase that tolerance so that it will pick up more of those pixels based on the initial red color. It will go to somewhat different pixels, and I'll just deselect, Command D, and show you, yes, indeed, with a higher tolerance, I have been able to pick up or select more pixels with a greater range of color, and that can be quite handy to manipulate. Your magic wand can work either with contiguous on or off. I had contiguous on, so only the pixels that were touching each other got picked up. If I deselect that and now turn off contiguous and now click in about the same place, notice that all of the pixels that correspond to that color range are picked up regardless of where they appear on the image. I'm going to go back to the 32 or so tolerance, 34 is close enough, and show you that on the lasso selection, for example, you have a choice between a freehand shape or, and I'll just deselect that, a polygon or straight line segment shape, which can be handy depending on the image that you're working with. Let's continue in the Painter toolbox with the crop tool. Very simply, drag a rectangular shape of any dimension and move it around if you wish, and when you're satisfied, commit the crop or simply double-click inside the crop area. I'll undo that. Now let's return to a blank canvas and look at the pen tool and its options. Even though Painter is a pixel-based program, the pen tool gives you all the power of a vector-like program such as Adobe Illustrator. With the pen tool, for example, I can make a series of anchor points and direction lines which can be manipulated in very precise ways. Notice that there is a blue stroke and a green fill, but the stroke is not completed here because this is still an open shape. I can use the close shape command, and now you see that blue stroke has completed the edge. Now, when I use my shape selection tool, I can drag an anchor point. I can move a direction line in order to manipulate the exact shape that I want. I can use this add point tool to add a point. There it is. And now I can simply hold my Command or Control key down to convert to the shape selector tool. I can subtract a point. That will change the nature of the shape. I can change the color of stroke and fill. I can determine that there is or is not a stroke. Likewise, there is or is not a fill. Opacity changes, the width of the stroke, and so on. Let's just make a few other options here. I will turn off the fill and I'll make the stroke red and wider. Now I have that stroke in red, but let me go now to the quick curve tool, which is a way to make a shape without necessarily having to use each individual anchor point. The anchor points with the quick curve that are made freehand are automatically determined. So again, you can go to your shape selection tool and move these items around, change the nature of the curve in any way at all. Once you're satisfied with a shape, and this shape certainly satisfies me, I can convert it to a layer. And notice that a shape layer, the one that is editable with all of these Bezier curves and points, has a specific kind of icon. As soon as I convert that to a layer, the icon becomes the standard layer icon. I no longer have points and direction lines to maneuver. I simply can use the layer adjuster tool to alter its opacity, its position, and to transform it if I desire. So I will eliminate that. I'll just delete that layer. But let's turn shape number 10 into a selection. Let's go back to the pen tool now, which is over here. And with the pen tool selected, I can convert this shape to a selection. And notice that the layer has disappeared entirely, and now I simply have a marching ants selection on my canvas. So it is a very powerful set of tools for creating exactly the kind of shape and thereby the kind of selection that you want. And I'll just deselect that. Let's move to the text tool. And this also creates its own special kind of layer. As you can see, it's got a little T on it there. And if I type some words in there, let's type text test. And it has the Macbeth font, because that's the last one I used, but I can change the font to anything I wish. Let's say marker felt thin. That looks good. I can, of course, change the color. I can change the point size. And I have a lot more choices if I go to my window menu and choose the text panel. So here is where I can decide whether or not the text should have a shadow, an external shadow, or an internal shadow. Let's make that external. Here is where I can alter the point size, the tracking. Notice I can stack those letters closer to each other with less tracking, lower tracking, increase tracking, and I stretch them out. If I had 2 lines, and I can make 2 lines simply by doing that, I can now go and change the leading or the space between the lines. I have a curve option. The curve style at the moment is no curve, but if I wanted to put the text on a curve, I could do it with this option. And notice that there are, in fact, anchor points to this curve. So changing the nature of that curve is just the same as working with the shapes and the Bezier curve options that you had with the pen tool. But I'll go to make that flat once again. Here's where I can change the nature of the shadow. I can blur it, and I can change the direction of the blur. Let's see how that looks. So we have quite a lot of choices and special effects in the text panel. We continue with our tour of the toolbox, and I'm going to show you dodge and burn, but first I need to make a stroke, so we'll have some pixels to play with. The dodge tool simply lightens pixels, and the burn tool, which shares a space with it on the toolbox, is a darkener. So that's all you need to know about that. And I'll just eliminate those strokes. I'm going to skip the cloner tool for now because we do devote quite a bit of time to that in other movies. Mirror painting. This will allow you to, for example, using our Sargent brush once again, let's make a stroke, and you can see that I have now 4 for the price of 1 because I have the horizontal and the vertical planes going, both at the same time. I could have either one. If I wanted to have more than 4 strokes at a time, I could return to the mirror painting tool and choose the kaleidoscope option. And now notice that I can have as many as 24 segments because the segments, I'll return now to kaleidoscope. Even though it says 12, that's 12 on each side of a plane. So there are, in fact, 24 segments. Let's make fewer of those. We can go down to, let's say, 8. And so now there are 16 segments. And I'll switch color, and I'll also switch to a different brush variant in my custom palette here. If I make a stroke, I'm going to switch to another color and make a much quicker stroke with my real drippy pen. I think you can see that there's a lot of very exciting pattern making to be done with the kaleidoscope feature and with mirror painting. Incidentally, if you want to turn off the visibility of those planes so you can see more clearly what your design looks like, that's where to do it. And of course, you can turn off the feature itself and continue to work on your design by just painting normally with a single stroke. So let's select all and delete that to go back to a blank canvas. And I'll just double click the title bar there so we get those variant icons out of the way. Now then, let's turn our attention to perspective guides, which also shares a space with some other handy features. The divine proportion is one, and also we have a layout grid. Let's begin with the layout grid. When we have the layout grid enabled, we can go to our window menu and use our composition panels. Let's choose layout grid from that group. And here is where you can determine the number and the position of the grids and whether or not they are going to be symmetrical, vertical, and horizontal, or not. And of course, you've got a choice for rotation. You can display them in various colors. You can make them less opaque in order to be less obtrusive. And it can be very handy if you want to copy an image to another canvas. Let's switch to Divine Proportion, which has its own panel that shares a space with the layout grid. But first, I think I'd like to turn off the layout grid by unchecking Enable. Now we go to Divine Proportion, and I think I'd like you to see how that can be used on a photo. Here is a photo of a building in San Francisco, and if I want to determine what would be an effective way of cropping this photo, I might want to use the Divine Proportion. So I've enabled it. I'm going to choose this area, this pavilion area, as the focal point. So that means I would like to have it be this orientation. And now I will simply drag the center of that spiral to the area that I want to focus on. And then I can change the size of the entire grid if I wish, or the entire proportion. So let's make that about like so. And then this shows me that if I crop to those edges, I will have a pleasing composition. Let's do that with the crop tool and see how that looks. So I will double click in the crop tool. I'll turn off the Divine Proportion. And I think we have achieved a good composition with this section of the photo as the focal point. I'll close that window and I'll go to the perspective grid, which is there, perspective guides, I should say, and I'll enable perspective guides. Let me zoom out so you can really see against that gray background what these perspective guides look like, and you can move them around. You can drag a vanishing point to any position you wish. So you could also use the perspective grid to guide your strokes. Let us return to 100% size, and I will show you by simply returning to our photo how handy this particular tool is. The Rotate Page tool will simply allow you to rotate the page so that drawing and painting is easier and more comfortable depending on your handedness and depending on what kind of lines and strokes you want to make. The grabber hand, you understand, is for scrolling around. The magnifier tool, you'll understand, is for magnifying or zooming out. If you simply want to go to 100% size, quickly double-click on the magnifier tool. In this movie, we will look at choosing and organizing color. Your color picker lets you choose a hue in the ring and the amount of saturation and value in the triangle. So the most saturated green at this hue is at this point on the triangle, and if you go to a different hue, those are also the most saturated. If you are at the extreme left in the middle of this part of the triangle, you have a medium gray. The top point is white, regardless of where you are on the hue ring, and the bottom point is black. So you can, simply by tapping, find a color that you wish. You'll have information at the bottom of the color picker as long as you have color info enabled. And this will tell you what the R, G, and B, that's red, green, and blue components are. If you know the components, you can simply type them in and get the color that you need. You can also have this info displayed as hue, saturation, and value. So here you can move the hue along this slider. Saturation will be increased as you go up on the S slider, and value likewise can be adjusted with the V slider. There is no CMYK color space in Painter, so you'll have to convert your RGB image in a different program if you need to prepare an image for high-end commercial printing. I'm going to simply uncheck color info so I can have a little bit more space. And let's look at the other two color panels. We have color set libraries, and I'll simply drag that out so we can see it along with the mixer, which I will also drag away, and now we see all three of our color panels at the same time. Now, a color set library is by default this collection, and one thing we can do is view them in somewhat larger swatches. I think that's a bit more convenient. You can import a different color set. You can save a color set that you make. You can create a new color set from an image, from a layer, from a selection, if you have a selection, and from the mixer pad, which we will look at shortly. But let's import a color set, and here is the collection that you are provided with in Painter 2016. I'm looking at flesh tones as a good possibility, so I will open that. And now if I simply scroll down, I see that flesh tones has been added to my color set libraries. I might want to create a color set from an image, so I'm going to use an image that's available to you in your Working Files folder. It's called Mill Valley Window. Let's just drag that over a little bit. Very colorful. Suppose I want to create a color set with these colors. I'll go to New Color Set from Image. I am prompted to tell Painter how many maximum colors I want. Let's say 18, sounds good. And I'm going to call this MV Display. So I clicked OK, and now I see that there are colors corresponding to the 18 that I specified to be maximum for my color set. Now suppose I want to specifically deal with these bright colors on this striped fabric. I will make a selection of those colors, and now I will instruct Painter to make a new color set from the selection. This time I'll reduce the colors to 7, and when I click OK and scroll down, I see that those are the most prominent 7 colors in that selection. I will now deselect, and I will show you how to remove a color set. We can use the Remove Color Set command, and I will click Yes. Now that color set is gone, I will also remove not flesh tones, but the other Mill Valley Display color set, and so now that is gone. We still have flesh tones and the default color set. I'll just drag that down over there. Let's go to our blank canvas and take a look at the mixer pad. Now this is the default mixer pad and the default colors that you can use to simply apply color. And here we have orange. I'll make an orange stroke. I'll make a red stroke, a blue one. I can expand the mixer pad. I actually have quite a bit of room available for stretching this out quite a bit. Let's do that. And I can also zoom in if I want to get a closer look at these colors and scroll around with the grabber hand. I can also add different colors. If I like a purple, for example, I'll hold my Command and Control key down and tap on one of those color swatches, and now purple has replaced that gray. If I like a turquoise color, I'll simply tap, and now that color has been added to my swatches. So I'm going to choose the Apply Color tool once again and put some turquoise in there and some purple. In addition to the Apply Color, there is a Mix Color tool, so I can go in there and splash around and blend these colors together if I like. I can sample a particular color, which then will become my main color in the color picker, and I can paint with that. So let me just get a tool here for making some marks. There we go, with that mauve color. I'm sampling this light green, and so I can make that stroke with my current oil pastel. Now, this sample multiple colors is a wonderful option. Now, if I zoom in a bit more and scroll around to where I have colors that are next to each other and use the Sample Multiple Colors tool, let's choose this gold and mauve combination. I don't see any change in my color picker, but if I use one of the variants in my Color Mixers custom palette, which is available to you in your Working Files folder, you'll see what happens. I'm choosing thick acrylic bristle, and now notice that I can paint with those combination of colors, that mauve and gold. I'll choose an area here between this turquoise and blue, and now, sure enough, I'm painting with turquoise and blue. Both of those were acrylic and gouache variants. We had thick acrylic bristle and then real long bristle. Now I'll switch to oily bristle, which is part of the artist's oils category. And I will choose, let's say, this gold and turquoise area. So let's see if I can get, indeed, I am getting that wonderful combination of colors with grainy dry brush. This time I'll choose the green and yellow combination, and we see, indeed, we can paint with those two colors together. So this is a very exciting capability of the mixer pad. More mixer pad options. You can reset the mixer colors, so that means we no longer have the turquoise and the purple. You can clear the mixer pad, and you can also change the mixer background. Let's say I want it to be a kind of a medium gray, so now that's what I have. In addition, you can import a mixer pad that you have saved, or you can import a mixer pad that was designed by another artist, in this case, Cher Pendarvis, who is a wonderful landscape painter. This is her mixer pad. Let's get our eyedropper, our sample color tool, and you can see that you can sample those colors at your discretion. I'm going to restore Jeremy Sutton's mixer pad, and this is a wonderful collection of colors that is typical of Jeremy Sutton's work. And suppose I want to paint like Jeremy Sutton. Here's what I'll do. I'll go to my color set libraries and I will create a new color set from Mixer Pad, and I'll call it Jeremy Sutton and click OK. I'm going to use new color set from Mixer Pad, and I'm going to increase to, let's say, 38 colors. And now when I click OK and scroll down, I will see that I have indeed captured the colors that Jeremy uses in his mixer pad. This movie is all about painters' paper grain or textures. In traditional media, we expect certain tools like square hard pastel or some crayons and some pencils to respond to texture of the material that you're working on. This is also true in Painter, and so we have a paper grain custom palette to work with here, and you can open that by using your custom palette organizer and the import command. When you open a new document in Painter, you're prompted to choose a paper texture. It is basic paper by default, but you have access to any of these items in the current library and a couple of other libraries as well. We have some watercolor papers, and we have some Painter papers from the 2015, the previous version of the program. I'll dismiss that, and I will cancel that. Not only do you have access to paper textures in the toolbox, but you also have, in the window menu, paper panels that I have opened for you. Let's drag papers away from the group so we can see both of these at once. Here's the library and another library, watercolor papers, and 2015 papers from the previous version of the software. You can make a new paper library at any time. You can import, export, and you can turn the controls on or off with this little icon. The Paper Controls panel allows you to make some changes in the size of the texture. You can get larger or smaller. You can change the contrast. That's less contrast. There's more contrast. And you can change the brightness or lightness. So with these changes, I will make another stroke with my square hard pastel. I'll change color as well. And so now I see that there is a more contrasty version of that. New in Painter 2016 is the capability of tilting or rotating the paper texture, and that can be useful for a number of reasons. Let me clear all of these strokes and use the horizontal chaos paper, which is a member of the watercolor paper collection. And if I make a stroke with that, and that's, I don't know if it's horizontal, but it certainly is chaotic. Let me show you how to create a two-tone effect by simply using the invert toggle. Invert makes a negative out of that paper. And incidentally, every paper texture is simply a grayscale tile that is repeated and has no color information associated with it. The color comes from your choice in the color picker. So with a change in color, I will now show you that you can fill in those spaces now that it's a negative and create some very interesting effects in that way. And I will undo those last couple of strokes. You can create your own paper. The make paper command actually isn't that interesting. It only gives you a few geometric shapes to choose from. You can change the angle, but that's something you can do in the controls anyway. So I'll dismiss that. And I'll show you instead the capture paper command. It's grayed out now because there needs to be a selection. So I will access a squash blossom necklace image, which you can find in your working files folder. I'll make a rectangular selection. And I think if I move it with the selection adjuster just a little bit, I will have the element I need. Now I can access the capture paper command. I will call it necklace, and I'll click OK. And it now instantly appears as a new texture in my current library, which happens to be watercolor papers. So I now have a new paper texture based on that selection as a repeating tile, and it has taken its place in my current paper library. So let's examine what that looks like when we go back to our untitled image, and I'll use, once again, square hard pastel to create that texture. I can, of course, tilt it. I can enlarge it, reduce it, increase the contrast, decrease the brightness, and so we have a very interesting looking texture based on the squash blossom necklace. In this movie, we'll work with Painter's media libraries. You have easy access to them on the desktop. Here's the pattern library. Here's gradients, nozzles, weaves, and brush looks. But we're going to open the panels from our window menu, our media library panels, and when we open the pattern library, we see we also have gradients, nozzles, looks, and weaves. Let's start with patterns, and you'll see that there are controls at the bottom of the panel for creating a new library, for importing a pattern library, for exporting the current one, and for restoring the default. You can also open the pattern controls with this little icon, and so let's have that open at the same time. Now, one thing you can do with a pattern is create a fill. So we'll make a selection and use the paint bucket. And now notice that source image is the fill with option, as opposed to current color, gradient, and weave. Now, source image can either be an image that you have already designated as a source, but if you don't, then patterns will be used. So the current pattern is hens and chickens, and if I make that click to fill the selection with source image, this is what I get. If I changed to a different pattern and click in the selection, then I get that pattern fill. I'm simply going to delete all of that. Filling is not the only thing you can do with a pattern. You have a whole category called pattern pens, which allows you to paint with a pattern. So we'll use pattern pen, and I must switch to the brush tool. And now when I make a stroke, I am painting with the current pattern. I have a couple of other variants to choose from. I can choose pattern chalk, and let's make a blue color here, because with pattern chalk, I can use my color picker to determine the monochrome color that will be used for the stroke, as opposed to the actual color of the pattern. Let's see what else we have in here. We have a pattern marker, which is going to provide you with a darker stroke, and you can go over it and create more dense color. And we have a pattern pen micro, which will make for a very tiny stroke using the pattern. And I'll just make all of those strokes go away. You can create your own pattern very simply, as you can with paper, by simply making a selection in an image. So I am going to go to the hubcaps image, which you will find in your working files folder. And I'm going to make a selection using the oval selection tool around this hubcap. Now I can use my selection adjuster tool to tweak that selection so that it is going to be exactly the way I want it. Let's try that once again. Here we go. So if I drag from those handles, I'm enlarging it, and I think that's just about right. Now I'm going to actually copy and paste that into a new image. So I'll use the Edit Copy command, which is Command or Control C, and then I will use the Edit Paste in New Image command, and we see it right there. Now I'm going to use the Magic Wand selection to select all of the white areas. I'm holding my Shift key down so I can add each of these corners to the selection. And of course, I don't want the white corners to be selected. I want the hubcap, which is the inverse of what I have selected. So I'll use Select Invert Selection, which is also Command or Control I if you want to learn the keyboard shortcut for that. So now the hubcap is selected. And when I use the Capture Pattern command, I will be prompted to give it a name. I'll call it hubcaps. I will accept rectangular as the tile, and I will leave the horizontal and vertical shift alone for now because I can always change that later. And I'll click OK. Now, in my Painter pattern library, hubcaps has been added as an item, and we can also see in the controls panel that we have hubcaps here. And let's just see what happens when we use the paint bucket to make a fill. Now let's see what happens when we change the nature of that pattern. It's still going to be the hubcap element, but now we have offset the items, and let's see what happens when we make that fill. So we have a different kind of look, and we can also change the size of the elements as well as change their offset. So it's as easy as that, and I will now turn your attention to gradients. So with the gradients panel here, and I'll just eliminate that from the other end, let's go to the gradients control panel. Any gradient that you choose in the gradient library, and notice that some of them are spiral and some are radial and some are linear, each of them can be changed to whatever style is available in the gradient control panel. So this swimming pool blue can be made into a linear style with choices down at this end of the panel to double or mirror the gradient. Here's a spiral. With a spiral, you can tighten or loosen. You can change the angle. So let's do one more. Let's take neon tangerine, turn that into a radial with some doubling and mirroring. Turn that into a spiral and tighten up the spiral and change the angle. So lots of choices there. So you can fill a selection with a gradient, just as you can use the paint bucket to fill with these other options. The gradient fill looks like this. If we change it to an angle and add a few of these options, we have yet another style. You can capture a gradient. And let me show you how that's done by opening a new image. I'm just going to eliminate that. And this image is also available in your working files folder. So I'm going to create a selection here that includes some of the different shades of purple and some of these metallic effects. And using my Capture Gradient command, I'm going to call it Purple Excalibur, which is the name of the car. And when I click OK, it will show me that I now have these wonderful purple style gradient effects that I can use for a fill. And also, I can paint with a gradient. So I'm going to put this out of sight and using the untitled document, choose not from a gradient pen category, but there are a couple of gradient pens in the pens category. And now I'm noticing that it's my Painter 2015 brushes, which is a library. Just as we have libraries for media, we have libraries for brushes and papers and other collections. So the pens category in the 2015 brushes has a grad pen or gradient pen. So I'll just make a stroke with that. A couple of strokes. That's our purple Excalibur. I'll do another one. I can use a grad repeat pen, and that will create the effect of the gradient being repeated at a 90-degree angle to my stroke. Just for fun, let me go to a different gradient and show the repeat for that, and then go back to gradient pen and just paint with fiery neon. So let me clear the canvas here and show you that you can also express a gradient in an image. So let's go back to our purple Excalibur and deselect that rectangle. And now with Neon Tangerine selected, I'm going to use the command that says express in image. And now, using my bias slider, I can determine how the colors in this gradient are going to be mapped onto the purple car image. And this looks pretty good so far. So I am going to simply click OK, and I have now created a very interesting and very wild look for that purple car. Let's see what happens when I fade that effect to some amount so I can have some of the purple come back and some of the orange or tangerine is also going to remain. So I think I like that. I'm going to click OK. And I might just have to save that. So when I do save an image, let's save that as purple tangerine Excalibur. I have a choice of file format. It's not a layered file, so I don't have to use either the Painter RIF native format or the Photoshop PSD format. JPEG is fine, or anything else that works for you. So I'm going to save that to my desktop, and I think I can probably use that for some kind of project. Let's take a break here, and when we come back, we will continue with the media libraries. We continue working with Painter's media libraries. I have the nozzle library open, and I will need my image hose to use a nozzle. Here's where you find the image hose in Painter 2016. And let's choose linear size P, where P stands for pressure. So if I stretch out my nozzle library panel, I can see that Painter 11 nozzles are made available, and I quite like the red poppies nozzle. So I'm going to use the linear size P to show you that as I make less pressure or more pressure, I am creating different sizes of the poppy. And all of them are straight up and down, vertical. If I choose the linear size P angle B, where B stands for bearing, and that means the angle of your stylus, and it will be easier to see what happens if we go to our interface preferences and choose Enhanced Brush Ghost, because this will allow you to see the tilt of my stylus. So linear size P, pressure, angle B, bearing, and now let's see what happens as I tilt my stylus. The angle of the poppies corresponds, and you see what the effect is of that. I'll undo that. In addition to linear, you have a couple of spray choices. So spray, where size is a function of pressure. Let's just see that instead of linear, there is a wider array of poppies being spread out. So that's what spray refers to. You can choose among all of these nozzles. You can make your own nozzle. Let me clear the canvas and show you how that can be done. I have a document that you'll find in your working files folder called Shoes. And it appears I've already selected something here. So let's see if I can unselect that so I can start from scratch. I'm going to use the lasso selection, and I'm going to make a selection around this red pump. Now with the magic wand, I want to subtract from that selection so that I can have just the shoe and none of the background, or as little of the background as possible. Now I'm going to do a copy and paste command, and let's open our layers palette so I can do a paste into a layer. And let's go back to the canvas. I'm going to make a lasso selection around the blue shoe and switch again to the magic wand and go back to the canvas and then make the shoe into a layer by doing a copy or cut and then a paste so that I now have those two layers. Let's do one more, and I think I'd like to have this big masculine boot as part of my nozzle. So again, I'm going to use the magic wand and subtract those white pixels and now use the copy and paste maneuver. So with these three shoes, I can now group them. I'm going to use my Command or Control key to select all of them, and now I can use the group command, group layers. And in the nozzle menu, I have a Make Nozzle from Group command. So I'm going to use that. I see my three shoes here. I'm going to save that as a RIF file and call it shoes. And let's put that into the area of the working files folder where you can find it. So now I'm going to dismiss that and drag that away. And now I can load the nozzle. Let's load the nozzle. We can see that the shoes image is waiting for us in the Chapter 3 Working Files folder, so I will open that. And now that has become a nozzle, but it hasn't been saved to the library yet. So let's add the nozzle to the library as shoes. Let's call them shoes 3. So now with my image hose and with my shoes nozzle selected, I can spray shoes. Or I can use a linear application of shoes with size as a function of pressure. So by all means, make your own nozzles, either from the shoe image or any other image that you wish. And then let's continue by looking at the brush looks. So I'm going to go to looks and I will clear the canvas once again. A brush look is simply a combination of a brush variant and an item from a media library. So, for example, Orange Neon is an effects category brush. It's the neon pen, and it has the orange neon gradient attached to it. So let's see what that looks like. Similarly, the lavender neon is a brush look that has the effects neon pen and the lavender gradient. Here's one that has a pattern pen using pattern pen micro and this particular pattern, which is called Little Branches, and let's see what that looks like. Once again, you can make your own brush look, and I'm going to go to patterns to show you how to do that with an item called Silver Tubing Pen. With pattern pens, I can make a rather interesting stroke, and I think I'd like to do that. Actually, I'm using Pattern Pen Micro, which is the tiny version. I'm going to clear those last few strokes and switch from Pattern Pen Micro to Pattern Pen Normal, if you will. And so now I can see, indeed, that I get a very nice range of thickness based on pressure. So I'd like to create that as a brush look, my pattern pens with the silver tubing as the pattern. So if I go to brush looks again, I can save the look using this command, and I see, okay, it tells me that I must first make a rectangular selection to use as the icon. Okay, I'll do that. I will make this little selection here because that tells me what it is. And now when I save the look, it will enable me to call it silver tubing. And I'll click OK. And I think it has become part of my brush looks library. So once again, I'll just clear the canvas. And if I switch to a different item, such as that, and then go back to silver tubing, notice that pattern pens and that particular item has been saved, and I can use it whenever I wish. One more library to look at, and that's weaves. With weaves, of course, you can have a fill using the weave, so let's make a rectangular selection, and let's fill with the weave. You have a choice for altering the weave in various ways. Let's look at the Weave Control panel, and here is where you can change the horizontal and vertical dimension independently of each other in order to make a very different kind of look. So you have a number of weaves that are part of your library, and that concludes our tour of media libraries. In this lesson, we'll look at Painter's menu commands. You'll need the Painter 2016 Sampler Custom Palette open, and you can find that by using your Custom Palette Organizer and the Import command, where you can retrieve it in your Working Files folder. So looking at File New, which will enable you to make some choices as to the size and other qualities of a new blank canvas. Here's where you'll choose height and width. If you use pixels as your unit, you don't need to even think about resolution. That only refers to printed size. You can choose a different color from the default white, and you've got a number of choices here for how to view color. There is a color picker that's similar but not identical to the color picker you're accustomed to looking at on the desktop. Here you have a circle with hue and saturation, and you have a slider for light and dark or brightness. You have other ways of looking at a color choice. You can use the crayons display. You can look at image palettes, which include spectrum, and I think you can see that your hue goes from top to bottom and your brightness goes from left to right. You can choose Monet haystacks as a way of selecting color. Here's an eyedropper, which lets you pick from this particular painting. You can use a number of lists of colors, including web-safe colors and Apple colors. You have also color sliders, which can be arrayed according to hue, saturation, and brightness, HSB, or CMYK. Even though Painter does not support a CMYK color space, this will give you the numbers that you need to specify a CMYK equivalent. And you also, of course, have RGB, as well as grayscale. So there are a number of choices for how to view and select color. And I'll cancel that. So we'll work with white. And paper texture can be determined or changed by simply tapping on that basic paper swatch. And here is where you can choose an alternative. I'll choose coarse cotton canvas. And I think I'm going to change the size to 900 wide and 600 high is fine. Resolution is not important. And I will save this preset. I'll call it Demo 1 and save it. So now, among the other presets that I have, incidentally, a particle brush preset gives you black as the paper color because many of the particle brushes are glow brushes. That is, they look much better on a dark surface. Other choices here for presets, the Painter default, which we saw portrait, gives you a tinted paper, this lavender color, as well as a vertical orientation. So let's go back now to the demo preset that I have just created, and I'll click OK. I like to have my image at 100% size, so I'll double-click the magnifier to make sure that that is, in fact, the case. And now let's just make some strokes with the brush tool. There's a stroke, and here's another one, just so we have something to play with when we look at some of the other commands in the File menu. But I think I'll switch from the color picker to a color set library, and I'll drag the color set off of the color panels group. I will also import a different color set, and I believe I'll choose Lovebird colors. So let's open that, see what that looks like. We'll just drag down here, and there are these Lovebird colors. So let's choose from some of these and make a few more scribbles over here. The grad pen is not going to be influenced by my choice of color, but by my choice of gradient. So we'll make a stroke like that. Now, if I'm ready to save this image, I will use the Save command, Command or Control S. and give it a name. So let's call it demo file, and put that on the desktop. I'll make a few more strokes, and that one is complex, so it's going to take a while. Let's try that again. There we go. That would be my real bristle drip. I'll make a real drippy pen stroke, and I'll make a variable width chalk. Now notice with chalk, it is showing me my choice in paper. It's showing me the coarse cotton canvas, which I selected when I created a new canvas. Now, if I want to just continue saving as I go, I'll continue using File Save or Command and Control S. But suppose I want to keep the previous version and save this as another stage in the development of my image. Then I will use Save As. So Save As, which again you can see has Shift Command or Control S. When I use Save As, I will need to give this a new name. So let's just add a 1 to that name and save it to the desktop. Now, there is a very powerful command called iterative save, which is grayed out now because I have to make a few more strokes in order to see it come up. And I'll do that with a few more of these. It's developing nicely. Now I can see iterative save is available. Let me show you how powerful that can be. Looking at the title bar, we see that demo file 1 has had a 001 added to it. And now when I make some more strokes, let's do some of those. Let's do one of those. And let's just keep on scribbling. I could go on for quite a while scribbling with these wonderful lovebird colors. So I want once again to use iterative save. And now notice that a 2 has been added to the file name. So I didn't have to go to the trouble of using the save as and creating a new name for this or typing in the 2. That was done automatically for me. Even more automatic would be to have all of that done at a single click. If you had that command in your custom palette, you could do that. And so let's add that command by going to Custom Palette, Add Command. We need to indicate which custom palette we want to put this command in, and there are a number of choices here. Painter 2016 Sampler is the one we want, and the command we want is going to simply be selected in the File menu. I'll choose Iterative Save. Notice it's showing. I will now add that, and I see that it has popped up into my custom palette. I'll simply use my Shift key to drag it over to a better spot. Now I'll click OK on that. And so now when I make more strokes and click Iterative Save, instantly I have that 3 added. So I can continue to work on this painting, continue to save stages at any point without an interruption in my workflow. So iterative save is an extremely powerful tool and command that you should use whenever you want to just keep painting and not worry about the logistics of saving each stage. Get Info lets you type in any notes that you may have about your piece, about the canvas. I'll just cancel that. Export will allow you to save an image as an EPS file, an encapsulated PostScript file, which can be opened in Illustrator or other vector programs. Email Image will allow you to give it a new name if you wish. Choose your mail server, decide what the file format's going to be, and the quality of the JPEG image in this case. I'll just cancel that. And finally, you can print with your command in the bottom of the File menu. So let's take a break here, and when we come back, we'll continue looking at menu commands. Let's pick up where we left off in the File menu. I'll show you the Place command, which allows you to open an image as a layer. So if we choose Chapter 3 from the Working Files folder, I'll choose Blue Shoe, and I'll click Open. I'm prompted to make a decision about color management, but at this point, I will not color manage. So I'll click OK, and now I have another choice to make about the size of the layer image. So I chose 40% for horizontal. That will automatically be 40% on vertical because constrain aspect ratio is enabled. That simply means don't distort. So I click OK, and we have our blue shoe as a layer. It's a reference layer, which simply means that you can move it around, you can transform it, but you can't paint on it or apply an effect to it until you convert it or commit it to a standard image layer. Just to show you what that looks like, if I choose a tool for drawing or painting and attempt to make a mark, I am given the commit dialog, and I will have to make a choice to commit or not. And if I don't want to see this warning every time, I can simply check commit and don't ask again. So I will commit. And now you see the icon for blue shoe is the standard layer icon. And so now I can paint on that. I'm going to skip quick clone and clone because we have movies devoted to those features. Let's go now to the edit menu where you see undo and redo at the top of the list. Undo will make that last stroke go away. I can have, by default, 32 strokes disappear or undo, and not just strokes, but commands and effects and other kinds of actions that I perform on my image. It's handy to learn the keyboard shortcut for undo and redo, Command or Control Z for undo, Command or Control Y for redo. There's also a very handy function here called fade, which means that you can undo something by a percentage. And I'm going to hide the layer for the moment, hide the visibility, and make the canvas the target for my next activity, which is apply surface texture. I'm just going to make this happen as an example of how you can fade an effect. In this case, I think the texture is too strong, so I'll go to Edit Fade, so I can undo by a percentage. And let's say I want to undo it by 85%. Notice the result is much more subtle, and we don't even see the texture on the white surface. So let's undo the fade. That's Command or Control Z, and now undo the actual effect. And now you can see it's very smooth. So fade can be a very powerful way for you to manipulate your image. To use the cut and copy commands, we'll have to have a selection. Let's make a selection with the lasso tool, and I will use the copy command. We don't see anything yet because we would have to paste it somewhere. So I think I will paste it on a new image. I have that command available, paste in new image. And so that item now has its own image and was cropped to the edges. Let's take a look now at the fill command. And if I want to fill this new image, I can do so in the same basic way that I can with the paint bucket, where I have current color, gradient, pattern, and weave as fill with items. But here I have opacity, so I can use the current color at a lower opacity, or I could choose gradient at a lower opacity than 100%, which is not available with the paint bucket. I'll simply cancel that, and I will close that new image without saving it. I'll mention free transform and transform as ways that you can scale and rotate that are similar to the options that you have when you use the transform tool from the toolbox. Let's make another selection in our canvas. And with the flip horizontal command, you can do exactly what you expect. With the flip vertical command, this is what you get. And let's move on now to the canvas menu. Resize is a way for you to change the size and or resolution of the entire canvas. And I will just cancel that. Canvas size allows you to add blank pixels to any of the edges or all of the edges for whatever amount that you enter. And I'll cancel that. Surface lighting is something I'll skip because there are more powerful lighting effects in another area of Painter. Now, in order to show you hide impasto, I'm going to make another stroke, And first, let me undo several of those last items. On the canvas, I'm going to make a gloopy stroke using green. And it also makes a wonderful mix with the colors underlying it. This has a thick paint look. Now, if I go to the canvas menu and hide impasto, notice that that stroke becomes flat looking. If I go back and show impasto, then I see that thick paint effect has returned. I can also simply clear impasto, which makes the impasto effect, the depth effect, just go away. And we can't retrieve it unless we use undo. I'm going to skip tracing paper for the moment, but I'll show you set paper color. Suppose I want to change the color of this paper to pink. Now I see that this is my main color. By using set paper color, I can now show you that an eraser will reveal that paper color. Paper color in Painter is simply defined as whatever the eraser reveals. So I can now select all and delete, and now I have a fresh blank canvas with the new paper color. Let's continue with our look at the canvas menu. We can have rulers showing or not showing. We can change from inches, which is an American thing, to other kinds of units such as pixels or centimeters. And I'll just cancel that. And with my Command or Control R, make those rulers invisible once again. We have two composition panels, Divine Proportion and Layout Grid. Let's show Layout Grid. And we have also a toolbox equivalent for Layout Grid. If I go to Divine Proportion, I see Layout Grid is sharing a space as well as perspective guides. So now with Layout Grid selected as a current tool, I have the option of enabling or disabling it here in the property bar. I can change the opacity of the grid lines if I wish. Let's make that 100% once again. But if I want to have more control, such as the size of the grid spaces, I'll need to open my composition panel. So Layout Grid, which shares a space with Divine Proportion, so they can be separated, but I'd like to keep them together. Let's enable Divine Proportion. Now they're both enabled. I'll turn off Layout Grid just so we can see Divine Proportion by itself, even though we have Divine Proportion in the toolbox, and that gives us a couple of choices, such as enabling and opacity. We still need to have the Divine Proportion panel in order to make changes in orientation, in size, rotation if we wish, opacity once again, and so on. So this is a very useful tool for determining where to crop an image and where to create a focal point in order to establish a pleasing composition. I'll just make those panels go away, and I will disable the visibility of Divine Proportion. Let's look at symmetry. Now, we have seen symmetry as in mirror painting and kaleidoscope painting. Let's show mirrors. We see from this plane that now if we paint, we will be painting on both sides of the plane. Let's change tool and let's change color. And we can disable that mirror mode simply by using Command, Option, or Control, Alt, and M. And now if I make a stroke, it's going to be a single stroke. We have turned mirror painting off. Now, I suppose you're wondering why there is a mirror painting tool in the toolbox as well as a mirror painting command in the canvas menu. And the simple answer is if you want to maintain your workflow and not have to switch between your brush and your mirror painting tool, then it's much easier, especially if you use your keyboard commands to make your symmetry on and off, and you don't have to worry about changing tools. I'll just make all of those strokes go away. Similar to that situation, of course, is kaleidoscope mode, where you simply have more than one plane. So once again, I can use my keyboard Command or Control K to turn off kaleidoscope mode. Now we just have a single stroke going, but if I use Command or Control K once again, I'll change color. Now I have the repeated kaleidoscopic effect, and I'll make all of those strokes go away. I will also go to my canvas menu and turn off kaleidoscope mode. Let's look at perspective guides. I will enable perspective guides, and here, once again, you have a tool in the toolbox as well as the menu command, and we will examine how useful perspective guides can be by zooming out just a bit, and I'm also going to fill this panel with a gray. I'll use the paint bucket for that so that you can see the perspective lines more clearly. With the perspective tool enabled in the toolbox and with it turned on here as well, because you can disable it in the property bar, but with it on, I can now change the position of my point, my vanishing point. I can change the angle of any of these elements so that I can make it match an existing image perspective, or I can just create a new perspective drawing from scratch. Now, with perspective guides on, I can enable perspective guided strokes. So now, wherever I draw, these lines are going to have to correspond to the lines on my perspective guide. I can disable that, of course, and draw without any of that constriction. And I will just eliminate all of those lines, and I will also disable the visibility of perspective lines. Color management settings and profile adjustments are beyond the scope of these tutorials. They have to do with printing, and we are not concerned with those. So let's move on to the Layers menu. There's a good deal of redundancy in Painter as to where you can find commands. We have the same kinds of commands, for the most part, in our Layers panel menu. And we also have a few of these icons for the essential commands down here at the bottom of the panel as well. But again, if you want to have a clutter-free painting environment by simply clicking the Tab key, you can get rid of all of those panels, and you will still be able to go to your Layers menu at the top of the screen. So that's why we see more than one way to achieve a given effect or obtain a command. Let's move on to brushes. And I will hit the Tab key again so we can see a few of our panels, including our brush panel. And I'll go to 100% size for our blank canvas. With brushes, once again, you have some of the same choices that you have if you simply use the menu in your brush picker. But there's something interesting in the brushes menu that we don't find on the brush picker, and it's the record and playback stroke features. So let me choose record stroke, and now I will make a stroke with Real Drippy pen. Now I'm going to choose playback stroke, and I need to tap the canvas. When I do, that stroke is played back with whatever color or with whatever I choose as the tool. So I've switched to leaky marker. Let me switch to gloopy, and that's going to give me the same stroke, but with a different variant. Now I can go back and uncheck playback stroke, and at this point I can just paint normally. Let's now look at the strokes menu. These are saved strokes that you can play back using any color or any brush variant that you wish. I'm choosing swirly, and now when I go to playback stroke and I tap, I can see indeed there's a swirly stroke. This time it was done with Real Drippy pen. Let's see what happens with bristle oils, and let's see what happens with leaky marker. So indeed, there are ways that you can have some fun by repeating a stroke in a variety of ways. If you have auto playback turned on, by golly, then it will just completely fill your canvas until you tap the canvas, and then it will stop. We continue our tour of Painter's menu commands with this blue shoe image, which you can find in your working files folder. I'm going to select the white background using the magic wand tool so that I can show you some items in the select menu. These few pixels can be picked up by simply using my shift key and the lasso tool, so I can drag around them. The property bar also gives me the options to subtract from a selection or add to a selection. Now, what I'd like to do is invert the selection so that the shoe is selected and not the background, but I also see that there's a bit of a halo of white around the shoe, and I'd like to tighten that up a little. So I'll need to use the modify command, and I see that they are grayed out. I need first to have the selection adjuster tool active in the toolbox. Now I should be able to get access to my modify commands. And I want to contract by, let's say, 3 pixels. And when I click OK, now the selection marquee has tightened around the shoe. I still have this little bit of white to get rid of. I'm going to zoom in and with my lasso tool and my option key down to subtract from that selection because I have the shoe and not the background selected. Now it's pretty good. So let's see what else I can accomplish with commands in the select menu. I can convert to a shape, and that will conveniently lead us to the shapes menu. I can set shape attributes by indicating whether I have a stroke or not, a fill or not, and what the color and width of the stroke is going to be. Same with the color of the fill. Let's make that magenta. So I'll click OK at this point. I still have the original shoe on the canvas, and I can see it if I simply turn off the visibility of the shape layer, which is its own special kind of layer. Other things we can do in the Shapes menu is set duplicate transform. Let's see what happens when we try some of that. My horizontal offset will be, I'm going to say 75, and vertical maybe 50. Let's make the scaling get a little bit smaller each time. Let's say 80 and 75 vertical, or let's make that 60 vertical so that we see a distortion. As for rotation, let's make that 120 degrees. And now, without much of an idea of what I'm going to see, let's click OK. Now we will have to go to the duplicate command, which is a handy keyboard command or control right bracket. So let me once again use command and control right bracket. And so we see a spinning shoe that gets smaller and finally goes out of frame. Well, that can be a handy command or set of tricks to use on a shape. I'm going to make all of those shapes go to the trash. Let's just, whoop, that one got locked. So if you want to lock or unlock a layer, use that icon at the bottom of the layers menu. But let's simply close this blue shoe without saving it. So we're back to an untitled blank document. The effects menu has numerous very exciting effects that we will look at in detail in another movie. Window gives us an opportunity to zoom in, to zoom out, zoom to fit, and zoom to actual size. We have our workspace arrangements to choose from, our palette arrangements, our custom palette organizer, which enables us to import and export and create custom palettes. These are the ones that I have access to at the moment. You can hide the user interface by using that command. Better yet, use the tab command on your keyboard. This indicates what is open at any given time. So we are seeing the toolbox, the property bar, the brush selector, the search field, and the media selector. We are not looking at recent brushes, so I will make that visible. There they are. And I'll just close them up again. We also were not looking at the command bar, which is a simplified version of the commands that you have available in a different format. Let's look at where we can access color panels. They're all open. Brush control panels are numerous, and we will devote a good deal of time to looking at brush controls in some detail later on. Paper panels. We have looked at our papers and our paper libraries. we can also get access to our patterns and pattern libraries. So pattern, gradient, nozzle, look, and weave. I'm just going to close those up to keep the clutter down to a minimum. Flow maps are similar to paper in that they are grayscale tiles that can be changed and rotated and adjusted in terms of size, contrast, and brightness. And they can influence certain kinds of brushes. Let me just show you some of the watercolor brushes. Let's go to real watercolor. When I choose real watercolor, I'm noticing that there are a couple of variants that have the word flow map in their name. So chances are they will respond to a flow map choice. Now let's see what that other noisy flow map fringe looks like. We'll let that evolve and dissolve into the paper. Now, clouds is the current flow map, so it's clouds that is influencing this particular stroke. Let's see what else we have in flow maps. Let's choose something quite different, such as fine dots, and make another stroke with the same color to see what the difference is going to be. And I think it's very clear that there's a strong influence on the stroke coming from flow maps. And I'll just close that. Returning to the window menu. New in Painter 2016 is audio input, and we will explore that in another movie. Hints enabled is a very handy way to see at a glance what sorts of brushes you're working with, what sorts of variables and settings are appropriate, and how they're going to affect your brushwork. It's handy if you're a beginner especially, or if you're new to Painter 2016, to have hints open. As long as you feel that they're not getting in the way too much, you can sort of drag them over a little bit. But they are contextual. That is, when you change to a different brush category or a different tool, you will find that your hints keep up with you and will provide you with just exactly what you need to know for that particular situation. The navigator is a handy item to have. Here it is at the bottom. It will enable you to move your image around just as the grabber hand would do. You can zoom out or zoom in. You can rotate your canvas by using this slider. You can reset the zoom to 100, and you have a number of settings that are available to you in the navigator. So you might want to have that open from time to time, depending on your project. Clone source is coming up in a future movie where we talk about the cloning feature. A reference image is very handy if you want to look at an image and use it as a way of choosing color or simply a visual aid for your project. Let's open a reference image, and it can be pretty much anything from our working files folder. I'll make blue shoe our reference image, and now notice that I can magnify it. I can stretch the reference image panel out. I can move the item around. I can use the eyedropper to select a color based on the pixel that I choose in the reference image. If I want to delete the reference image, I'll just click on the trash, and now I'll close the reference image panel. The check mark shows that we have layers open. We'll discuss channels in another movie. Let's look at the auto painting panels. Underpainting, auto painting, and restoration. I quite like some of the underpainting choices, and I'm going to demonstrate them using another image that is in your working files folder, the Mill Valley window. I can leave it at 50%, and I can show you that you can have a different color scheme applied. Let's look at some of these other color schemes that are available. We will be using the underpainting panel in projects that will be in other movies. Auto painting, likewise, is something that we will devote some time to, and restoration as well. So I'll just close that and go down to scripts. Painter scripts that are provided for you are images that have been recorded one brush stroke at a time. And let's take a look at what happens when we play back a script. I'm just going to watch the cartoon man come to life. Let's hope that's what happens. There he is. Just sit back and enjoy the work of Don Siegmiller as he creates this cartoon man for us, as it's recreated automatically for us in Painter. Scripts have been around since the beginning, and they are a very powerful feature of Painter that allow you to record your own work as well as see the work of other artists play back for you. When we look at the Help menu, we see there's a search field. We can open our hints in the Help menu. There are tutorials available on YouTube and online through Painter. Let me just turn that off. So there are a variety of ways that you can get help and instruction from Painter Masters. You can even download a user guide or an introduction to Painter as a PDF file. You can also retrieve the welcome screen, which is something you're accustomed to seeing when you open the program.